Okay, welcome. Today we're going to talk about types of cells. We're going to talk about the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So when we look at prokaryotic cells, pro means before, and karyot means nucleus. And then the eukaryotic cells, eu means true, and so true nucleus. So prokaryotic cells are before nucleuses were around, and eukaryotic cells mean that they have a true nucleus. So if we look at prokaryotic cells, that includes bacteria, and that means that they have no nucleus. Their DNA is free floating in the middle of the cell. They're super small and super simple. So the prokaryotic cells are about 10 times smaller than eukaryotic cells. So they're very small, they're very simple. They were the first cells on Earth, which kind of explains why they are small and simple. And the two main examples of prokaryotic cells are bacteria and archaebacteria. And those are the two domains that are prokaryotic. And we'll talk about domains and kingdoms and all of that a little bit later in the year. But bacteria and archaebacteria are the two types of cells that are prokaryotic cells. They have no nucleus and they have no membrane-bound organelles at all. They do have organelles, they're just not membrane-bound organelles. So the only membranes that they have is their cell membrane or their plasma membrane that surrounds them on the outside. And so on your note sheet, you want to take a minute to label the prokaryotic cell. And so here you'd see the DNA is in red in the middle. And then we've got the cell membrane that surrounds it on the outside here. And they also have a cell wall. It's different than a plant cell wall, but they do have a they do have a cell wall on the outside. So this white part is the cell wall. And all these little dots are the ribosomes. And the ribosomes help them make proteins because all cells have proteins. And then the cytoplasm is the space that's everything else in between. And then we've got eukaryotic cells. Eukaryotic cells do have a nucleus, and the DNA is going to be found inside of the nucleus. They are large and complex. They're complex because they've got a lot of different organelles and they've got lots of compartments. So they're much more organized and structured. So they're going to be large and complex, 10 times larger than the prokaryotic cells. And they do have membrane-bound organelles. They're going to have all kinds of membrane-bound organelles. They're going to have a mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, Golgi apparatuses, vacuoles, and lysosomes. So lots of different membrane-bound organelles. And they evolved from prokaryotic cells, and that's one reason why they are more complex than prokaryotic cells. And we'll talk about how they evolved from prokaryotic cells a little bit later on in the year. And for examples of those are animal cells, plant cells, fungi cells, and protists. So all of those kingdoms, the animal kingdom, plant kingdom, fungi kingdom, and protist kingdom, those all are made up of organisms that have eukaryotic cells. And so you want to take a minute to label a eukaryotic cell. So the nucleus is typically found in the middle. So this would be your nucleus here. And inside the nucleus, all these little black stringy looking things, those are going to be the DNA in there. And then the cell membrane is going to be what's on the outside and defining the cell. So that's your cell membrane. And then the ribosomes are all going to be all these little dots in here. And the rough endoplasmic reticulum has a whole bunch of ribosomes attached onto it over here. And then let's see, the cytoplasm is going to be all the space in between. And then the mitochondria is this one here that's got kind of the inner membrane and an outer membrane, and then it's kind of all these squiggles inside. The inner membrane is all squiggly, and we'll talk about that when we get to cellular respiration. but that is where the energy is produced in the cell. And it's a very distinctive shape and structure. Kind of looks like a little bit like a peanut sometimes. And then we've got the Golgi apparatus, and that's this. These are membrane-bound structures, and it kind of looks like a stack of pancakes. And that is going to package and ship your proteins and other molecules out of the cell or to the cell membrane. And then the rough endoplasmic reticulum is these squiggly membrane sacs that typically have ribosomes attached onto the outside of it, because what will happen is the ribosomes will make proteins and send it into the rough endoplasmic reticulum, where those proteins are processed and shipped to the Golgi apparatus. The smooth ER looks very similar to that, except it doesn't have the ribosomes attached. So up here would be a smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and that will package and modify lipids. So they're going to process lipids in the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. Okay, so again, pro rhymes with no. So remember, no membrane-bound organelles. They're going to have DNA free-floating in the cytoplasm, but eukaryotic cells will have DNA that is in the nucleus. So both of them are going to have DNA. They're just going to be located in different areas. Both of them are going to have ribosomes. The prokaryotic is not going to have any membrane-bound organelles, while eukaryotic cells do have membrane-bound organelles. Okay, so here is a eukaryotic cell. So this is an animal eukaryotic cell. And so looking at that, they're going to have all of the eukaryotic characteristics in an animal cell. They are going to have small vacuoles, and this is going to be different. This is one thing that's different from plant and animal cells. Animal cells will have a small vacuole, but plant cells are going to have a large central vacuole. They have no cell wall, and this is another difference between animals and plants. Plant cells will have a cell wall, but animal cells do not have a cell wall. They do not have chloroplasts. Animal cells cannot do photosynthesis, and so they do not have chloroplasts. Another difference between animals and plant cells. Animal cells are going to be multicellular organisms. So they're going to be made up of lots of different cells to make the organism. So they're going to have lots of different tissues and organelles and different structures, but they are made up of multiple cells. So they are multicellular organisms. So examples of animals would be humans, dogs, insects, fish, lots of different animals that I'm sure, familiar with. Here is a eukaryotic cell, number 2. This is a plant cell. So these are going to be a lot more structured. They're going to be more rectangular in shape. So animal cells typically are irregularly shaped, so they can come in all kinds of shapes and sizes. Plant cells are typically more rectangular in shape, and they are going to have all the eukaryotic characteristics and some features that make plant cells unique. They have cell walls, and their cell walls are made up of cellulose, so they're going to have cellulose cell walls. They do have chloroplasts because they can photosynthesize. They have a large central vacuole, and you can see that that's kind of typically near the nucleus. So that's going to be this thing, this big blobby structure over here. And they are also multicellular organisms, so made up of lots and lots of different cells. Some examples of plants are flowers, trees, grass, bushes, things like that. Then we look at fungi, another eukaryotic cell. They are going to have all the characteristics of eukaryotic cells, and features of a fungi no chloroplasts. They do not belong to the plant kingdom, even though they kind of look like plants. They do not have chloroplasts. They are unicellular or multicellular organisms. So sometimes they're going to have a single cell. So if you think of yeast, yeast are unicellular, single-celled organisms. And then if you think of a mushroom, that's going to be a multicellular organism. So fungi, in the kingdom fungi, you're going to find both multicellular and unicellular organisms. And some examples are mushrooms, mold, yeast. Those are all fungi and eukaryotic cells. And then if we look at some protists, protists have a lot of different kinds of cells and organisms in that kingdom. But they do have characteristics of eukaryotic cells. They're going to be mostly unicellular, single-celled organisms. And some examples of those are euglena, amoeba, paramecium, etc. But this is kind of a kingdom that's mostly unicellular, but it's going to be a lot of mixed types of organisms in this kingdom. Some of them can photosynthesize, like the euglena, but some of them cannot. Some of them have flagella, some of them have cilia for movement, some of them don't. So they're going to have a lot of different characteristics in this kingdom. One cell satisfies all the needs of the organism. One cell does everything because they are unicellular organisms. Their cells are going to be a complete organism, and they're going to do everything for that particular organism. And so these are all protists. And so the euglena has a flagellum, which is an organelle that is for movement. So that tail-like structure is the flagellum, and that helps them move. And cilia are these short little hairs that are attached onto it. So that organelle is also for movement, and it helps that organism swim through the water. And then pseudopodia is what an amoeba has. And it sees feet-like projections, and it kind of moves like a blob. So they're kind of false feet that kind of move as the organism moves. Okay, so again, prokaryotic cells are without a nucleus. So they kind of evolved before the nucleus evolved, and then eukaryotic cells do have a true nucleus. So that's kind of a summary of prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, and I hope you were able to fill in your notes. You can always go back and rewatch the video, or you can watch it and pause as you go to fill in your note sheets.